Hi, family. My name is Quanisha Johnson, and I am the owner of BTG Counseling and Educational Services LLC. I am a licensed counselor and educator, and I am so excited to be collaborating with the Calaboose African American Museum to bring to you a virtual series on topics that impact the African American community. Our theme one will be the dynamics and challenges of parenting and families. Under theme one, there will be four different sessions. Session one will be understanding and overcoming the impact of intergenerational patterns. Session two, essential steps to resolve family conflict. Session three, the pact, steps to positive co parenting. Session four, the do's and don'ts of work life family balance. Join me for the next 4 weeks for this weekly discussion that will include education and resources. Bring your journals and something to write with because at the end of each session, there will be a reflection activity to do afterwards. I look forward to you joining me. Happy Black History Month. As always, please take care of yourself, take care of each other, and be well.
Hello, my name is Quanisha Johnson, and I'm a licensed educator and counselor. And I am so excited to bring to you today session one out of a series of four under a very important umbrella topic. Our theme that we'll be discussing for the next 4 weeks is the dynamics and challenges of parenting and families. Topic one, which we'll be discussing today, is understanding and overcoming the impact of intergenerational trauma. I'm going to share with you some information, some tools, some resources, and I'm going to do that right now. Okay. So as I stated before, our topic today is understanding and overcoming the impact of intergenerational patterns, such an important topic. So I'm going to start by just talking about what family is. If we talk about intergenerational patterns, we have to take a closer look at family. What exactly do we see family as? So very interestingly enough, I looked up what the dictionary had to say about what family is, and I found to be an interesting way of defining it. Family is seen as a fundamental social group in society, typically consisting of one or two parents and children. Then we have children that are part of one of these groups, a group of persons related by descent or marriage. And then we also have people in the same line of descent or lineage. Now, the third definition says all of the members of a household living under one roof. Now, the definition of family given by the dictionary is not necessarily inaccurate, but it does not give the full range and depth. And in some way undermines what exactly family is, especially in the African American community. So family is one word, but it could have such a rich meaning. It has various meanings, and I think that are larger than what we saw in this dictionary.com definition. So let's just take a look. Okay, here we go. I want to show you some things. Let's talk about family. Is this what a family is? What about this depiction in this picture of a grandson and a grandma? This picture, this, or this right here. So we see by looking at these photographs that in our community, the definition of family is so rich. It's so complex. It's so beautiful. It means different things. And so I just wanted to show you what families can look like. The definition given earlier undermines the idea that families aren't always living under one roof. Families aren't always comprised of people who are married and have children. Not all families where the couple has children. There's so much in our community. The definition of family is so rich and impacted by so much. So let's look at redefining family. So each family is unique and comprised of different members, as we see, right? So as a community, we have to understand that although we share in so many different experiences, we are not a monolithic people, right? We come from different viewpoints, thoughts, even though we have this connection, right? This shared connection of experience, all of us as individuals are different, and we come from different families, and there's so much that connects us, but we are not one and the same. Black Americans specifically have experienced major transitions through history impacting the Black family. So we can't deny the history and how the history impacts family today. So if we're going to talk about intergenerational patterns, we have to not only look about what's right in front of us, but we have to go back. We have to go back and look at the bigger picture. So we have slavery, emancipation, desegregation of the United States, and I can go on. Jim Crow. We have our current day events. We most recently, a few months ago, witnessed the horrific death and killing of George Floyd on national television, on media. So there is so much, right, going from slavery, emancipation, desegregation, Jim Crow, the civil rights movement. I can go on and on and on. So much impacting our community, right? So important. So I started with slavery because if we talk about the family, the Black family, slavery served to be a division in the Black family, right? Then we have emancipation, which was supposed to be freedom, right? Freedom. And I want to read something to you to fall in line with that. I want to read a small excerpt. So we talk about slavery as the starting point of division. So we came from a rich family background, right? Separation of the family, divisiveness, dividing us, and then emancipation, but the challenges that went along with that. So I want to read this to you. So this is from an article from the Washington Post. And it's from an article from September 7, 2012 by Lonnie Bunch. And this is just an excerpt to give some connection and talk a little bit about the connection of not desegregation, emancipation, right? And the family, the Black family. As soon as Hawkins Wilson, an enslaved African American from the region outside of Galveston, Texas, realized that he was free, he knew exactly what he would do. He would begin a search to find his family. And remember, slavery, division from the family. A family he had not seen or heard from since he was sold from a plantation in Caroline County, Virginia, 24 years earlier. To facilitate his search, Wilson sent a letter seeking assistance from the Richmond office of the Freedmen's Bureau, a crucially important, though short-lived federal agency created to assist the newly freed in this moment of challenge and possibility. A moment of challenge to reunite with the family, but also possibility. I am anxious to learn about my sisters from whom I have been separated many years, Wilson wrote. I am in hopes that they are still living. He then explained that he was sold at a sheriff's sale to a Mr. Wright of Boydtown Courthouse, and that he hoped an additional letter that he enclosed could be delivered to his sister. So I wanted to give context to that, to the idea of redefining the family, what the division served to do, and then the emancipation and all of the challenges that the Black family faced through time, leading us up to today, connecting to the intergenerational patterns. So there was no way to talk once again about intergenerational patterns and not giving light to the story, an example by Hawkins Wilson, an enslaved African American in search from his family that was once divided. So what exactly are intergenerational patterns? Let's talk about it. So they can be positive and negative patterns of behaviors transmitted from generation to generation. So I wanted to underline positive and negative. So I don't want to come to you today simply discussing negative patterns. There are patterns, behaviors that are passed down that are positive. think about that recipe that you learned, how to cook, how to clean things appropriately. Before the term hack was out and you were going Pinterest and find a hack to do something, you learned those hacks sometimes from a grandmother, a great grandparent that was passed down from your grandmother to your mother to you. So there are positive as well as negative patterns that I want to shine light on. Sometimes the patterns are conscious and sometimes they're not. We're not always aware of what we're doing. We absorb our environment. I can give an example. I love providing context to things. I remember, as I stated earlier, I'm a licensed educator. I remember teaching my first class many moons ago. The students are now adults. And I remember I would often say, well, actually, I would say to my students, well, actually, that's not the right answer. Or, well, actually, this is what we're going to do instead. Well, actually, and I would say it often. I don't know why. It was just a phrase I said. And although we're talking about family, I was a teacher and I saw my students in the community as my family. They were with me all day long. They absorbed their environment. I remember talking to one of my parents and she telling me that her son would often use, guess what phrase? Well, actually. So I don't think he was doing it. There was no malice involved. He wasn't trying to mock me. He was absorbing his environment. And his teacher, who he was with all day long, utilized the phrase, well, actually. So that's what happens to us in our families. We absorb our environments. So sometimes the patterns that we're following, we're not aware of them. Sometimes we are, and sometimes we are not. Um, the impact may not only be on the next generation, but remember, when we're talking about intergenerational, we're talking about from generation to generation to generation. So it's not like my grandmother to my mother and it stops, or my great grandmother to grandmother and then it stops. So we can see the impact from generation to generation to generation. And once again, we can go back to our history as a people and understanding there's no way to separate what the experience was that we had over 400 years ago, to separate that from then to now and pretend as though there are two separate things and not connect the past to our present. Okay, so let's see. So then patterns. So when we think of patterns, we think of a recurrent way of behaviors, something that we're acting out on a regular basis, right? We have a recurring way of doing things, right, over and over again. So we see evidence of patterns in words, actions, and attitudes. So how we see something, how we perceive something. I gave you the example earlier with words. So hearing something often, especially with children, and absorbing it, repeating it, not because someone sat you down necessarily and said, okay, say this, but because if you're in a household and you're with your family on a daily basis, these things are going to happen. You're going to, you hear the term children are sponges. They're soaking up their environment. They're paying attention to the behaviors and then they're repeating things. It's also in an attitude. If we feel and think something about a certain type of food or people or an environment or anything, we can pass that on to our family members, right? Because it shows how we feel and think about something. Our attitude shows in our behaviors. There are nonverbal messages and verbal messages. So we pass things down that we learn and know, even if it is not the truth. I'm going to repeat that part. Sometimes things are passed on to us. We learn it, we absorb it, we spread it to others, right? Even when we don't know it to be true. We don't know. It's just something that it was passed down, that information. We don't know how accurate it is. We don't challenge it. We just know it to be true because it's what we've been told. So not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. And this is a quote by James Baldwin. If we don't face it, if we ignore it, if we try to hide from it, we can't change it. We can't change it. If there are patterns that are not favorable, that have impacted life negatively, we can't escape them. We can't. We can go through life avoiding, but avoidance does not equal elimination. You're not avoiding something by acting like it does not exist. So we have to face it in order for us to be able to change it. If we know where we came from, we may better know where to go. If we know who we came from, we may better understand who we are. And we see a tree there, right? We hear a lot of connection and correlation of a family tree, right? Learning, like we're all the apple falling far from the tree. There's so many different phrases and sayings that connect to families as a tree, right? With branches that connect to each other. And we have to know where we are coming from, right? We have to be informed. Once again, referring back to the James Baldwin quote, we have to have the knowledge in order for something to change. Knowing not what we also came from, but who we came from, knowing our family. So this is what I want to go over with you. In order for us to change intergenerational negative patterns specifically, we have to do three things: identify the pattern, modify the pattern, or discontinue the pattern. Identify, modify, discontinue. IMD. Identifying what the pattern is, modifying it accordingly, or discontinuing use of that pattern. So that is just how I want you to look at the method into which we are going to change our intergenerational patterns, right? Be that one that's going to cause change. So step one, knowledge, knowing, identifying. That's the first step, right? So we think of the 12-step process, right? We think about the 12 steps. What is the first step in the 12-step process when we think of people with substance abuse disorders? Knowing that you have a problem. You have to know and acknowledge that something is a concern. So you have to identify it. If you don't know that it's there, it exists, if you ignore it, you can't change it. You cannot change without identification. You have to do that first and foremost. We are in a constant state of reconciliation, right? So I want to talk to you about what reconciliation is. Reconciliation is trying to find a harmony, right, between two different ideas, feelings. So we're trying to just put it together. So we have this idea, this feeling, we have this one too, and we're just trying to go boom, right? It's like a merger of like what we know and what we feel. Sometimes we're often in a place where we're trying to connect, and it doesn't always, make sense for us, but we're trying to figure that out. So what was I raised to do? Often, right, is in conflict, or we're trying to reconcile that with what do I choose to do? I know what I was raised to do in my family. I remember, or I've absorbed my environment. My parents or grandparents or whoever was in my household taught me this. This was passed down. But like, I'm also looking at what am I choosing to do? And we're in conflict about that sometimes. There is a sense of belonging, right? We belong to a family, no matter what the family makeup looks like. And all families are different. Often in my work, I find that there is a lot of comparison of families. Well, this person's mother did this, and this person's father did this, or gave them this opportunity, and I feel the lack because I didn't have this. Remember, our families are not all one and the same. Regardless, you belong to your family. You're a part of that family, be it right or wrong to anyone. There is that sense of you belong, right? But then you're also going through life with a sense of being separate, being an individual, trying to merge those worlds. What am I raised to do? What am I choosing to do? Right? What is the medium of that? Right? What is going to bring about a healthy lifestyle, life satisfaction, well-being, right? Merging those worlds in some way and figuring those things out. Which patterns, you ask yourself this, which patterns, behaviors, and habits are healthy for your life? Remember, you're asking yourself these questions. That's a part of the identification process. You're kind of sorting through, breaking it down. So what we need to do still in the identification process is identify. We're gonna be with identify for a few slides here because I really want to kind of hone in and focus a little bit on what are we identifying? What am I looking for? Sometimes you need to know what you are in search of, what you're looking for, and I think that's very important. So I have here to start identifying genetic patterns. So this is one area we're going to look at. So there is a transmission of genetic markers in our life. So there's a term, right? Genetic predisposition. And I'm going to explain what that is. Genetic predisposition is an increased likelihood of developing a particular disease or an illness based upon your genetic makeup. So just baseline, your genetic makeup, if your parents, you inherit these things. If your parents, if your grandparents, we've all been to the doctor. You go to the doctor and you have a physical, and then they ask for your family history. So they said, very recently I went to the eye doctor, for example, and they wanted to know if there was a history of glaucoma. And I was able to say, yes, there is a history or in my family of a glaucoma. That as far as my knowledge came from, my grandma had glaucoma. So then I was able to go back. So they don't ask, they ask, yes, is there, or no, is there not, and then who, right? So that's genetic patterns. It's important that we're aware of that. So yeah, it's important to be aware of the behavior piece, which we'll talk about, but the genes, those things are important too. So many of these markers are hidden until activated by something. And I want to talk about that a little bit. Now, what I mean by that, and I'm going to give an example. Let's say, for an example, you are your mother, your grandmother, right? Or we could say father's mother had diabetes or has diabetes, right? So you are not a diabetic, right? But you're predisposed, right? Remember what the word genetic predisposition is. You have an increased likelihood. So diabetes, you go to the doctor, you don't have diabetes. However, you're predisposed to it. So it remains, right? It's hidden, it's laden, right? It's not activated. But because you're predisposed, if you intake through your life a high sugar and carb diet, the diabetes may be activated. So when we identify, we have to be aware of genetic patterns, right? We can't just say, well, down the line or going back, right? This pattern, right? My great-grandmother, my grandmother, my mother had diabetes. So I'm probably just going to be prone to diabetes. No, the identification, the awareness could help us figure out, what do I do next? I know there's a history of this in my family. It's my genetic makeup I cannot change. So guess what? I'm going to be more mindful of what I'm intaking into my body. I'm going to be more mindful of eating a lot of sugar, taking a lot of carbs. I'm going to make sure I'm going to my physicals, getting blood work. So because you're aware of that genetic marker, you have more control and more power of what happens to you. So then I'll give another example, right? We're talking about genetic patterns, epigenetic inheritance. So that term, I'm going to just break down as simple as possible. So it's when nature and nurture collide, right? Genes you inherit, right? So that's the nature part. And then the life experiences, they come together. So genes you inherit, and then the life experiences, they come together. So that is the whole idea of epigenetic inheritance, right? You just naturally, your genes are a certain way, and then you respond to your life experiences. So we have an example of that with trauma. Trauma can leave a chemical mark on one's genes, and it can be passed down from generation to generation. How we deal with trauma, the impact, the negative impact on trauma, right? Think about when you're experiencing trauma, and trauma is a threat to the well-being. And we talked about in slide one of the biggest threats to our well-being as a people, right? When we talked about slavery, and that continued, right? There's systems in place that continue. And we talk about the impact of that trauma, leaving a chemical mark on your genes. And so we had to think about from generation to generation how trauma was dealt with, what trauma does to the body, what trauma does to the brain, right? Internally, how it manifests, how that can be passed down from generation to generation. So that example of trauma is that idea of the epigenetic inheritance, right? The nature, right? Our genes. And then what happens to us and how we deal with it, how our body responds to it. That can be passed down from generation to generation. So the next thing we're going to look at is identifying culture and religion. So what are the traditions and cultures that may reinforce intergenerational patterns? And I'm going to give you examples. So this is the area where I really want to look at that, because families all have traditions and they all have different cultures, no matter where you come from. So it could be a culture because it's a tradition or a cultural way of life within your family. It could be connected to your nationality, regionally where you live. There's a culture, there's an influence in the greater community. So an example is your religious affiliation. The religious affiliation influences the attitudes and beliefs about, for example, marriage, right? When to get married, what age to get married, child rearing, so how you raise your children, the mode of discipline, parenting, and how you see, like how you parent your children, how you deal with conflict. How your religious affiliation could tie into how you deal with when you're dealing with conflict within the family and outside of the family, what you're taught to do, right? Then we have the idea of examining connections to the greater community. And the greater community, let's look at that. So we have our cultures, right? Our traditions, our belief systems within our family. Then we have cultures, traditions, beliefs of the outside community. And that's when earlier I talked about reconciliation, joining two things together, trying to find harmony in those two things. So I want you to look at that last line, examining the connections to the greater community and thinking about the impact of social media, thinking about the impact of peers, thinking about going to school. So everything you're learning inside of your home, in those, within the walls of your home, everything that's passed down. So what your parents learned from their parents, and then they learned from their parents, and passed down, right? Connecting that, beliefs, attitudes, actions, right? And then in some type of internal conflict, because you're learning something possibly totally opposite in the outside world. You're learning something different from social media. You're about what marriage looks like, about the how-tos of raising your children, right? How to deal with conflict. You're learning that. And then you're trying to figure out, how am I, right? I need to identify what I learned within my home and what I'm learning outside of my home and what works for me. We're still identifying. Lots of identifying, right? Big step. That first step, doing that. You got to know that awareness is key. So these are other examples. I got gender roles up here. So gender roles, what ideas were reinforced about what it means to be a man or a woman, or I'll go back, a boy or a girl? The conditioning, right? This is a boy toy. This is a girl toy. Boys should do this. Girls should do this. There's all of those stereotypes. We learn them, right? They're passed down from generation to generation of what should be done, what it should look like. That's passed down. Then we have education, right? What does it mean to achieve academically, right? What were you taught? What were your parents taught? What's passed down? What are the expectations? And I want to read something to you again. So we're looking at what achievement looks like, right? And that can not only be with education, but it could also connect to career. So for example, right, when our parents or our family, whoever we grow up with, because we said earlier, family, there's this idea of nuclear family. There are children that are growing up in a household with grandparents, aunts, uncles, children who are adopted. So we talked about the faces of family being different, right? We don't want to put a cap on that. But in terms of your home, your family, whoever you call family, however you see family, when children, right, they have a direct communication from family about what achievement looks like, right? And that is given to them. That is a better predictor of success than the scores they get, right? When your family models and talks about and discusses, right? Not in a way where there's a pressure of like, you have to get A's, and if you don't get A's, not in that way, but when there's a discussion, right? Communication. about what it looks like, what your child sees it as, or perceives it to be, what your parents perceive it to be, what was taught to them. When there is a conversation and it's directly communicated with children, there's a greater sense of success than whether or not they just get high scores on tests. So, identifying family eating habits and exercises, right? How we exercise, what we do. We learn that, right? Think about eating. Think about our eating habits. Think about and reflect on how you grew up eating. How do you eat? What do you see food as, right? What's a connection with food? Exercise. I love examples. I was a child who grew up to watch a mother always exercising. My mom always had a VHS tape. This is way back in the day. She would put in the VCR. Yes, I'm dating myself with a VCR, and she would exercise. She would run. I remember going to the park and watching my mom do a 5K. I watched that. She never sat me down and said, "Okay, exercise. This is what you need to do." So there wasn't a direct communication verbally. But remember, we give nonverbal cues. As a child in our family, we are absorbing our environment. And so basically, I went on to duplicate those habits that I deemed to be healthy. Not overdoing exercise, but seeing exercise and what we eat as healthy, as good for my body. So I merged the worlds together. I saw what I was raised to do, not through a verbal message, but through a nonverbal. My mom didn't say, I saw it. And then went on myself to say, I'm looking at that. I like that. That works. My mom was healthy. She was well. And I wanted that too. So then I went on to duplicate that in my life and exercise and love to run, right? So an example of an intergenerational pattern, right? Learning that. And I'm hoping to pass that down, right? So for me, absorbed that, and now I'm passing it down to my children, and with verbal and nonverbal messages. I'm not going to just tell them to exercise. I'm also going to show them that I exercise, right? Practice what I'm preaching. Being aware and identifying addictions within our families, right? Being aware of that. What are the addictions, right? Sometimes in our families, there's a lot of secrets. We're quiet about it. But remember, in order to change, to grab hold of something, to make sure that we don't succumb to certain things or are impacted negatively, we have to be aware. So just identifying what are the addictions, if any, within the family. So also very important, in line with my work as a counselor, how do family members manage stress and positive coping skills? How is that, viewed? I think that is so important, and I'll explain to you why. Children who observe parents modeling positive coping skills are more likely to demonstrate those behaviors and have a greater sense of well-being. So, like how it's modeled within the home. So stress is a part of life that does not go away anywhere, but we want to be mindful of how dealing with stress is communicated. And this is why it's very important for parents, grandparents, whoever are the adults within the family, to take care of themselves. We can never pour from an empty cup. When your cup is empty, what are you pouring out to others? So just being mindful of getting whole in order for us to be good to our families and take care of them, right? And to make sure they are well, just making sure that we are understanding and managing our own stress, and positive coping skills. What are healthy ways we need to deal with our stress? It's identifying that we have stress, right? And foregoing this, I got to be strong and just, deal with the mentality and figure out what do we need to do. Asking ourselves that question every day. So we want to be able to identify and say, how was dealing with stress modeled within my home? What did I see and how did it impact me? So remember, a lot of question asking. Don't be afraid to ask questions. They're very, very important in this whole process of the identification of the changing of intergenerational patterns that may not be the best for your life. So now we are on modify, right? Another important topic is modifying, right? We said identify. Step 2 is modify. So You're going to say, I went through my identification process, right? I mapped out all of those things we talked about. I asked myself important questions. I identified how religion in my home, the culture within my home, genetic patterns, addictions, the impact, what was passed down. I identify. I went through that process, right? I know that this uncle struggled with this. I know that a great grandparent struggled with that. I know the history of over 400 years ago and what that looked like and how that impacts. And I'm tying everything together. So I know which patterns that are healthy and the ones that need to be modified or changed. So now I looked at all of those things and now I have awareness, right? So now we're going to go into pattern modification, which is the key. I want to give you an example to bring light to what pattern modification is. We're going to use the example of addiction. So let's say, for an example, you come from a family where addictions plagued your family, right? Substance abuse disorder, right? You had a parent, a grandparent. So you know there is, with addictions, a genetic predisposition. We talked about that word earlier. Being predisposed to substance abuse disorder, right? You vowed yourself. I saw how this ravaged my family. I saw what alcohol, what drugs did to my family. I saw that. I identified the pattern. I know that I'm predisposed. And remember, I don't want to activate it. Like we gave with the diabetes example earlier, I don't want that activated. I don't want to do anything that is going to jeopardize my well being. So I'm like, no, I have children. I lecture them. I give them pamphlets. We talk. They are well aware that um, using substances for any reason, we don't do that. I lecture them daily. They know. They know. However, 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 I still feel the sting of my experience growing up with a parent or living with a grandparent or a family member who was struggling with substance abuse disorder. And so I feel these feelings. So instead of passing down, right, I don't drink, so I'm not passing down that part of the pattern, right? I pass down um, a feeling of being victimized. I pass down anger because I'm angry that that was my experience. And remember, anger is a secondary emotion. There's always something with it. It's not by itself. So I'm passing down anger. I'm passing down, I feel victimized and I'm judging. I'm judging that family member and I'm passing that down to my children. I'm talking with them also about the ills in terms of how it impacts them physically and don't do it, but I'm also passing down the anger. I'm passing down the victimization of it. I'm passing down the judgment, right? Being judged, like prejudging, and I'm passing down all of the pain with it. So when I say pattern modification, so now you got to think about the pattern, which is the addiction part, right? But I can change that. I can modify that, right? But along with not drinking and teaching my children not to drink, I have to have them aware of what the impact is, right? I have to deal with my own pain. I have to deal with my fears. I have to deal with my anger so that I'm not passing that part of it down. Because remember, addictions, right? They manifest in different ways. There's different, there's a physical manifestation of it, a mental manifestation, emotional. So maybe the part of drinking, we're making sure we just stop, the buck stops here. But I want to make sure in that process of changing the pattern, I not only make sure that they're not drinking or I'm not drinking. I don't want to pass down the behavior part of it, the anger, the fears, the pain. I want to work through that. So that's why it's called pattern modification. Because if we don't, guess what's going to happen? We have to be aware of the reactive patterns part. So we're avoiding the behavior, but we're emotionally responding. So be mindful. We're modifying. So it's pattern modification. So we need to not only change or alter this pattern, you got to be aware of the emotional part that goes with it, how it impacts our mental health. So both areas. So pattern modification, pay attention to that part as well. So now we are looking at the last part of discontinuing, right? We want to discontinue something. We want to stop it. We don't want it to keep going. So think of your family mapping process as just a blueprint, right? And what is a blueprint? The blueprint is the framework. Think about an architect putting a blueprint together for a building. And it's a framework, it's a draft. So your family mapping process is just the framework, right? You're looking at, we put all the pieces together. And there's a process of family mapping. There's a genogram, right? There's a very specific process that can be done. It can often be done by yourself, but with a therapist or mental health professional, they can help you to do a genogram. And it's basically a family tree, but really mapping out patterns, right? Relationships. You map it all out. But with the questions and the topics that we talked about today with genes, the genetic patterns piece, the cultural piece, gender roles, that we did some mapping. If you do those steps and pay attention, that's also mapping. So if we look at this mapping process as the blueprint, the framework, or the draft for the big design, right? What's the big design? You're the big design. So you're looking at all of these pieces to the puzzle, the framework, what you've been given, right? We're born into a family. Unlike if we go to school and we choose a friend, we can say that friend may not be the best for me. But we're born into a family. You're not going to alter no matter what you do. If you choose not to talk to them, you're still a part of that family, right? And you've been given things, right? You're born into a culture. You genetically, your genes are your genes. You can't give your genes back, right? You got to think about all of these things we've been given, all of these patterns passed down. When we map them out and look at them, it's a framework, it's a draft. Think about a draft when you wrote in school. You were able to, with a draft, make revisions. There were things you kept, things you added, you deleted, you took away, right? So the blueprint of your family mapping process is for the big design, right? You're the big design. Think about it. You have the capability of designing the things in your life the way that you want to. So remember, individuals who can recognize unhealthy patterns through family mapping will increase their self-awareness, right? So if you are able to recognize that identifying part, what patterns are healthy, right? And paying attention, and you'll know also what's healthy and unhealthy because it'll be something that's good for you. No matter how much, let's go back to the simplicity of, but complexity also of food. Food is good, right? But we can indulge in those delicious recipes passed down, those recipes from generation to generation. But we also have to say, we're going to our appointments and we're getting our blood work done, and our cholesterol is high, right? We have to say, although that is a delicious recipe passed down, it might not be the healthiest for me because it's manifesting within my body in an unhealthy way. So it's really paying attention to what serves you, what works for you, what is allowing you to have the best physical, mental, and emotional well-being. Because if you have that, if you're choosing to create a family of your own, you can work then to pass something down as well that's healthy for them, to take, to absorb. Recognizing your ability to change will shift your mindset. So you have the ability to change, right? We don't want to feel like we are powerless, right? Think about this pandemic. Think about just feeling as though we don't have any power over anything. We can't go here. We're not able to do these things. So I often tell people I work with to, in terms of shifting the mindset, is looking at what do I have control over at this time? What can I do? What do I have the ability to change? What do I have the ability to change? There's a category of things that I'm like, I can't do anything about it. But there's also a category of I have the ability to have an impact on change of this area of my life. And so I'm aware of the other parts. I'm aware, let's say, of the genetic predisposition, right? But I'm also aware of my ability to change, to make sure that there are things that I'm doing that are in line with my health and my wellness. Although you may not have started it, you can work on how it stops. That is key right there. Although you may not have started it, because we're talking about intergenerational. So we're going back generations, right? You didn't start it, right? It didn't start with you, but you have power to work on how it stops. It could stop right there with you. But it's about the mapping process, the identification, the modification, and then if necessary, discontinuing. You making a choice about what's healthy for your life. Identifying, modifying, and discontinuing intergenerational patterns, right? We're going to do two columns. We're going to have the is not, and then we're going to have the is. So, for one, this process, this identification, this modifying and discontinuing is not about blaming family members. It's not about pointing fingers. It's not about looking back and saying, you messed up. You didn't do that. It's not about blaming. I'm this way. I have this problem because of you. It's not about that. It's not about feeling as though we are being victimized and feeling like because that mentality sometimes makes us feel stuck and that we can't do anything about it. So like knowing and identifying the patterns, it doesn't mean that we're stuck right at that pattern, right? It's not about, and this falls in line with blaming family members, judging and criticizing. The example I gave earlier about the substance abuse disorder, right? So that parent, for example, wanted to work to make sure that no one was physically drinking alcohol. However, they were passing down the judgment, the criticism, the pain that goes along with judging and criticizing. So we want to make sure it is not those things, right? And it's also not an overnight process. The work you do today can have a great impact on future generations. So we want to look at it as this. If it's intergenerational, right? It goes down. Generations keep going, right? It doesn't stop with us. It didn't start with us, right? In terms of your specific life and your aspirations, what you want to do and how you want to live, you could stop things with you. But think about the positive thought of it doesn't stop with you. You can help who's coming after you, right? We can help that. That feels good to know that we can do that. But what it is, it's operating in empathy. Empathy is not sympathy. It's not feeling sorry for this family member or feeling sorry. It's putting yourself in someone's shoes. When you put yourself in someone's shoes, it really is an empowering process. It's a process of humility because you're understanding, well, there's a possibility that my mom responded this way. When I look back at the history of my family and how my mom raised me, or my dad or my grandparent raised me, if I look back at those patterns, I might understand. I might not say I'm condoning it or happy about it, but I may not need to judge, criticize, or blame because now I'm looking back and saying, wow, that's what was passed down. That's what grandma learned from her mom about how she should express feelings. That's why grandma did not promote my mom and then me to have a voice in my family. That's why we weren't allowed to say something. There's so much in our families, but then once again, it goes way back. Think about over 400 years ago, what we are conditioned to do, what's passed down, what messages were given that we have to sort through, decipher which messages work and which ones don't work. So it is working to achieve your personal goals. So remember the family, I have a sense of belonging, and then I have a sense of my being, who I am and who I want to be. And I am allowed to work on those things to achieve my personal goals in spite of. No matter what, I'm allowed to do that. I don't want anything to be able to stop you from working to achieve your personal goals. And remember, it's okay to ask for help, to need support, to talk to someone, to work through it with a professional, to work through it with other family members. It is learning from the decision of others. So we want to learn from others. We don't want to judge, but we want to learn from the decisions. So we don't want to like push the blame, but we want to learn. Communication and understanding is what it's about. Communicating, understanding, right? Talking, not blaming. Because when you blame and judge, there's an attack that the person feels. Even if you're right, if the information you're bringing forth is supposed to be correct and it's accurate, blaming and judging, the person can't hear you because they automatically feel attacked. So communication is key. So we want to bring light to the patterns. We want to talk about it within our families. And so we want to be able to talk about it in a way where it is productive, there's understanding. Generations are different. Please keep in mind that when we're talking with our grandparents, our parents about something and our impact or our community, what we learned on social media, our opinions, they might be different because the generations have different impacts. They saw different things. They were impacted by different things. So it doesn't have to be a negative exchange. It just might be a different exchange, how they see it. But it's coming together with communication. It's a dance, right? I'm listening to you. You're listening to me. There's a verbal part. There's a nonverbal part. I'm communicating with an I message. And I'm not attacking. I'm not blaming. I'm coming forth with understanding. I'm understanding why that was my grandfather's experience and how it's different from mine. And I'm coming forth with that. So families need to be able to do that part. Do the best you can until you know better. Then when you know better, do better, from the late, great Maya Angelou, right? We do the best that we can. With that identification process or paying attention to the intergenerational patterns, knowing what they are, right? We don't have to be caught off guard. We need to understand them so that we can do something better for ourselves and for future generations. Now, it's reflection activity time. We learned today that patterns and behaviors passed down from generation to generation can have an impact on who we are and how we see ourselves. Take the letters of your name and spell out positive and negative, healthy and unhealthy patterns. Then at the bottom of your page or on the next page, write down either what was beneficial about the message or a counter message that is more helpful. I'm going to show you the example of what I did with my name, right? So this is a part of looking at everything, right? And then looking at what we know and what we want to change. Let's look at this. Okay, so I'm spelling Quanisha here, right? Quanesshna. So these are things I learned. Questions meant talking back. So what's my counter message I might put at the bottom, right? It's good to be inquisitive, right? So it's not necessary. There's a very big difference between a child being disrespectful and then sharing their perspective, being inquisitive. And so being mindful that we encourage children to be inquisitive, not to be disrespectful. There's a time and a place. There's a way to do things, but they're being inquisitive and they're wanting to know and they're asking questions is not necessarily a bad thing. So you see the cue, what I learned, you ask questions, you're talking back. So I countered it with a message. So what I would write at the bottom, I would write, that's not what I meant. Then I have use your voice. No won't hurt you. My mom always gave me this message that I hold near and dear about utilizing my voice. That ask, right? If you want something given to you, you have to ask for it. No won't hurt you. I mean, unless it's detrimental to life or death situation, but asking for something that you want, asking for an opportunity, you're going to be told no sometimes and your feelings will be hurt. But I want to keep that message. I utilize that today to ask for the things I want, to utilize my voice because no won't hurt. How will I know? How will I receive if I do not ask? So what I would write at the bottom is that this message empowered me in my business to help my community, right? So that is a message I'm keeping and I love. Hey, always save your money. Another one I'm keeping, but I'm paying attention because I want to make sure that I'm also living my life. I'm enjoying things that I want to eat, places I want to go. So I'm going to save, right? So I'm taking the message and I'm going to write about how I was taught to save, but simultaneously wanting for me to have a happy medium between saving and then living in a way that's healthy and good for me. My N, never let them see you sweat. So this is a mixed message for me. So I wrote that down, but at the bottom of my page, never letting them see you sweat. Now, about that. So my struggle that I've had over the years is like I'm a person of expression. And so I like for people to be able to express themselves, say how they feel. And I don't want that message to be misconstrued with stay quiet. If you're having a hard time, don't say anything. If you're stressed, keep it silent. So that message, although I understand that you go in there, you do your best, it's conflicting for me, and it had been over the years to not express myself. And then when I'm in pain, to let someone know so I can get some help. To eat until you're full. That for me did not work. So my message underneath is that I do not encourage my children to keep eating, to keep eating. I make sure as a parent, I'm giving portions that are in line with what they're supposed to have. And we're not just eating and eating and eating until we're full. So that message for me, although food is a beautiful, great thing, it tastes great. We talked about those recipes passed down. We don't want to eat until we feel so stuffed. So that for me is not a message I want to pass down. I have shopping for the S is therapeutic. I love shopping, but it is not a long-term or a very efficient way of therapy, and doesn't fall in line with my always save my money. I do want to enjoy myself, but I want to have different methods to feel better, and it can't be always from something tangible. I can't always feel better. What if I don't have the money, the finances to support shopping? Do I now still feel down? Am I sad because I cannot? So although I love shopping, what I would write at the bottom is I love to shop. I love getting things I need. I love taking care of my family, but I don't know if I want to utilize it as a form of therapy. I want to have other skills, other tools in my toolbox. 8, husbands should be the breadwinner. So I'm looking at the idea that I was passed down to me that husbands, this gender role piece we talked about, right? Of husbands should be the breadwinner. And I'm not disagreeing with the idea that in a family, partners should come together and take care of their families. Everyone has their part. But this doesn't fall in line with this whole idea of the gender role that I want to have for my family. So I don't necessarily subscribe to this. So I will write that at the bottom of my paper. And lastly, understanding from seeing it and experiencing it. Abuse is verbal, physical, mental, and emotional. I was a witness to all of these things. So understanding what abuse looks like, not wanting that, understanding that I witnessed some. So how it manifests in my life. What do I want to do? What do I want to pass down? What I'm not wanting to receive from a partner. So that is a message that we think of abuse as someone hitting you or hurting you, but it could be mental, it could be emotional, it could be verbal. So that is a message I learned that I want to make sure that falls in line with how I am raising my children and the message I'm giving to my family, the importance of recognizing what abuse is and not boxing abuse just to physical. So I want to give you that example. This is your reflection activity. Take your name. You do it this way. You write down the letters and you just think about those messages, those patterns, those behaviors, both positive and negative, and how they have impacted your life. And write underneath the counter message. So I hope you enjoyed our conversation today. Take out your journals. Try to work on this reflection activity. Be well, be safe. Until next time, and make sure you are caring for yourself. Bye-bye.